Geratophobia is the illogical, unreasonable fear of old people and of getting old. And we have an epidemic of it.
Maggie Kuhn, co-founder of the Grey Panthers and one of the great leaders and spokespersons of our time, is making a unique contribution to American society. She is challenging age-related prejudice and generating national support for the needs inherent in the aging process, from the United States Senate to the American Medical Association. With her extraordinary energy and insight, Maggie Kuhn portrays the admirable spirit, commitment, and new image of aging in America.
Our focus is not on old folks' issues. We're not a gray lobby. We're not working for the special interests of old people. We're working for the special interests of people, humanizing, hopefully, and healing our society of its divisions.
Thanks, Emily. So hello, everybody. Good afternoon, friends, neighbors, and supporters of the Grey Panthers. Welcome once again to our Transformation Tuesday series, which Grey Panthers has hosted on the last Tuesday of the month since 2021. I am Michelle Arnaud, leading the New York chapter, and on behalf of our board, I'd like to convey our gratitude for your support of the Grey Panthers movement, which was founded in Philadelphia in 1970 by Maggie Kuhn, whom we just saw in that brief video. This weekend, I watched Maggie on Saturday Night Live. She appeared on the show with Candice Bergen 50 years ago on December 20th. She spoke about the importance of making intergenerational friends with Candice Bergen, who instantly became her friend. And you can find the show on Peacock and hear Maggie tell the audience to get off their ass. Anyway, she also famously reminded us to speak up, although our voices may shake. So let's do our best to raise our collective voices. Our mission, as stated by Maggie 50 years ago, is to combat ageism and age discrimination, in addition to promoting intergenerational contact, which is the intention of our series. With today's program, we're excited to bridge generations as well as gain insights on the political climate with Diane Hessan, award-winning author of Our Common Ground, Insights from 4 Years of Listening to American Voters. Last year, our board member, Ron Rowell, introduced an intergen book club to the Grey Panthers with our then coordinator, Sophia Casal, who's currently completing a PhD in gerontology. Ron is host of 45 Forward, a nationwide internet talk show whose mission is to help listeners make the second half of life even better than the first. This year, we decided to include authors in our Transformation Tuesday series. And what topic is more top of mind than the political divide in our nation today? I encourage everyone to type questions for Diane in the chat. We'll try to handle them all. Our presenter, Diane Hessan, is an award-winning entrepreneur and innovator in the market research field. She's a nationally recognized expert on the American voter. A former member of the Boston Globe editorial board, she's written extensively about the voices of the electorate. Diane tells stories of people from all over the country of all political persuasions, ages, and ethnicities. She helped me understand why people love Trump's rallies, why 35 million Americans think the 2020 election was fraudulent, and more. Most importantly, she has shown me how we need to change the way we listen. She's the founder and chairman of C-Space, the first company to leverage social media for consumer insights, among many, many other accolades. So now I'm going to pass the virtual mic to Ron Rowell, who will facilitate today. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the board and delighted to have Diane on the program. This is a subject of immense importance. It's personally important to me. Before I hand it over to Diane to talk about the book, I just wanted to give you one quick anecdote for why this is so personal for me. And the book is both provocative and evocative. And what you evoked in me was a story from, I realize it's 20 years ago, when I joined the board of an organization, a nonprofit organization, that was going through a really tough time. It was very divisive. It seemed like it was going to split in two. And of course, not knowing what I was doing, I joined the board. And at the beginning of the term, we had a session with a facilitator who talked about two things. They asked the board two things: what do you need, and what do you commit? And I remember sitting next to a man who I didn't know very well. He had a reputation for being very direct, very opinionated, to the point of being strident. And I don't remember what I committed, but I remember what he committed, which really surprised me, which is he had on, and he wrote down, I commit to sitting down and having a conversation with someone with whom I disagree the most. And I thought, wow, did not expect that. And I remember that all these years. And it really struck a chord. And with that, I just want to turn it over to you, because this is your space about, listening and dealing with these subjects. So I want to start with you. And folks, so Diane's going to speak for about 20 minutes or so. So let's hold our questions. I'm sure we have a lot of them until she finishes, and we'll have a robust conversation back and forth. You can put your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try, as Michelle said, try to handle as many as we can in the time we have. So Diane, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Those were such nice introductions. So thank you for reading the book and remembering the stories and everything. And hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here with all of you. Yeah, I'm going to, up front, I'm just going to lay out what I've been doing. I'll give you a little bit of background on how I got started with this, and then what I've learned and what I think it means, and then we can have a conversation. And feel free to write your questions in the chat. And as you come up with questions, feel free to be provocative and tell me you don't agree, or give me some other examples or whatever. I think it's, anything's game. That would be in the spirit of Maggie Kuhn, who was like that, who talked a lot about being provocative. So I spent most of the last 25 years or so in CEO jobs, mostly as an entrepreneur. And the biggest company I built was a tech company called Communispace, which was a next generation market research company where we used the power of the internet to help brands understand their consumers. So just think focus group on steroids. Like, why have 10 people in a room for an hour when you can have access to hundreds of your target consumers whenever and wherever you need their advice and feedback through the magic of the internet? And the company got big, and after we sold it, I was running another company in the education space, but I missed market research a lot. And in 2016, I got a call from a friend of mine that was very high up in the Hillary Clinton campaign. And he basically said, look, I'm just wondering if I can pick your brain. We have a lot of data about what is going on, but less understanding of why. And he wanted to see if I had any ideas. We talked for several hours on the phone, how to really get to the core of what was going on for voters, which was a big deal in political research, because in consumer research, there's all kinds of different methodologies that people use. In politics, it's mostly focus groups and polls or some kind of survey. So I came up with all of these ideas, and through that conversation, I decided to take what I knew about understanding consumers and parlay that into the political arena. So in 2016, I created an online panel of voters from all ends of the political spectrum, every age, every ethnicity, every state, etc. And just as I had done in my business, I was basically in conversation with those people every week for probably 8 years. In conversation means literally on Tuesdays with this group of people. They always knew it was going to be a Tuesday. I would give them a new project. It might be a survey. It might be a true false test. People love fill in the blanks exercises. So I'd make like Mad Libs. I'd have them watch a video and send me their reactions. We did all kinds of creative stuff. And it was a breakthrough in political research, because when you build relationships with your respondents, it's amazing how if you build trust, you can get people to really open up and tell you what they're thinking, as opposed to what you can get from a one-off poll or a one-off focus group. So the building of relationships and making people feel that what they were telling me mattered was really, really critical to this. And in the early days, whenever I learned something new, I wrote about it for the Boston Globe. So my first article for the Boston Globe came out in the fall of 2016, and it was called Understanding the Undecided Voters. And in that, I wrote about how my undecided voters flipped to Donald Trump at one point more than any other. And that was when Hillary Clinton said that you could put half of Trump supporters into a basket of deplorables. I mean, people went crazy. They thought that was just the most elitist thing. And since then, I wrote over 50 columns for the Globe on everything from how millennials think about politics to, of course, some of the things that Michelle mentioned, why 35 million Americans think the 2020 election was fraudulent, to why a woman would ever vote for Donald Trump. No, let's vote for Donald Trump enthusiastically. And it has been quite enlightening for me. And I have loved applying what I did for brands to the political arena. And in the middle of COVID, I decided to pull it all together and create this book, which did really well a few years ago. And it's so funny because now there's an uptick in sales again because everybody's saying, oh my gosh, how do I manage my stress? So what I'm going to do is just net out about 5 or 6 themes that have really stood out for me over the years. I'm now not talking to people every Tuesday. I'm probably in conversation with them every other week. So let me just give you a few of those. Okay, number 1 of my findings, which is why the book is called Our Common Ground, is when it comes to policy, there is generally much more common ground than you would think in the US. So if you ask voters about the issues, immigration, gun control, healthcare, infrastructure, and so on, you can get 80% of Americans to say yes and compromise on a particular solution. So for instance, you can get 80% of our country to agree to an immigration bill that gives the dreamers a path to citizenship, that builds a physical wall on some parts of the southern border, that increases humanitarian treatment for arriving migrants, that adds more screening resources and technology, and so on. It might not be an ideal bill, but people would look at it and generally be fine with it. As you probably know, these bills don't pass. And one reason is that many of our elected leaders are just better off with the talking points that come from no resolution. So it is easier to be a Republican and scream and yell that migrants are still pouring into our country and that if they elect you, you will stop them, or to be a Democrat and make the case for immigration and compassion and say that you will make sure that no child is ever again put in a cage and so on. So the act of resolving the issues takes the talking points away. And so we perceive that we agree on nothing. And the other broader problem is that the extremes are getting the airtime. If you're from journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. We have right now divisive leaders supported by media that makes money by telling stories of crazy people. So if you're a media company, you get more eyeballs showing white nationalists than you do showing normal people trying to live their everyday lives. I even know this. My husband and I watch Lester Holt every single night. And the last segment on NBC News at 6:30, he says, and now for the good news. And we literally usually turn the TV off by then. And it's not that they aren't heartwarming stories, but it's just not the thing that attracts the eyeballs. So we see the stories of people who are extreme. We see a man from rural Kentucky who owns 300 automatic weapons and loves his guns. And we conclude that all Trump supporters are like him, but they aren't. But there is common ground on the issues. So I've already hinted at the second conclusion is because of all these extremes, we have perceptions of the other guys, the other side that are really inaccurate. So let me do both sides of this. If you ask most Republicans about the Democratic Party, they will say Democrats are a bunch of elitist socialists who want to take my hard-earned tax dollars and give them away to criminals and illegal immigrants and people who are just too lazy to work and who want to take away my guns and allow women to have to use abortion as birth control and who want to completely dismantle policing. And more recently, Democrats subscribe to this destructive, woke ideology that believes that equality of outcome is more important than equality of opportunity. Or if you ask most Democrats about Republicans, and especially those who voted for Trump, they will say that they are a bunch of hypocritical, uneducated deplorables who sleep with their guns, who refused to wear masks during COVID, who deny that climate change that is happening, and who never met a Black person they liked. Or more recently, who would support the destruction of our democracy in order to elect a president who's been charged with criminal activity and who plans to persecute everyone who's heard him. Both of these are wrong, but these are the stereotypes that were on the ballot in our country, and they dominate our perspective. I will tell you that I have 500 voters in my panel. I would say that about 20 of them are really pretty awful. And the other 480 care about their families, don't have super crazy views of the world, and are just trying to get by. Third point is the concept of voting against versus voting for. So I found this in 2016 and 2020 and 2024. In 2016, the number one reason that people voted for Donald Trump was not that they thought he was a really great guy. They hated Hillary Clinton. People used to say to me, forget just the deplorable stuff, they thought that she was totally corrupt, and they would state an entire lifetime of questionable activities: Whitewater, Vince Foster, Clinton Foundation, Benghazi, stealing furniture from the White House, defending your husband against a woman who had accused him of sexual harassment. I mean, they went on and on and on. This dislike of the alternative happened in 2020. Lots of people who voted for Biden in 2020 were just voting against Trump, and vice versa. Lots of people who voted for Trump were voting against Biden. It happened again last November. People voted, against Trump, who Democrats thought was a liar and a criminal, and the other half of the country voted against Biden, who Republicans thought was a liar and a criminal. So I can go on and on this one, but it's the voting against. By the way, we have not always voted against things. From time to time, there is a candidate who is so magnetic or inspirational, like Obama was in 2008, that people vote for someone. But the against thing is an enormous dynamic. The fourth thing is just the move to being moderate. So right now, I would estimate that about 2/3 of Americans would characterize themselves as moderates. They believe they are a very small group because they don't get the airtime, and they certainly don't perceive that there are a lot of moderates in Congress. These are voters who want to make progress, but who don't believe that government is the solution to every problem that we have. And they're big believers in equality of opportunity, but not necessarily equality of outcome. I mean, whether you would call yourself a moderate or not, from my voters, and I'm happy to share a bunch of quotes with you, here's what I've concluded most Americans want. And this is no matter what side people are on. I think what voters want most of all is nothing short of a new American dream, like a promise once again, that if you live in the United States, the sky is the limit, that upward mobility is wired into the way things work, and that in exchange for the benefits of living in our extraordinary country, its citizens will work hard, participate in their communities, respect and honor diverse opinions, and not expect to be taken care of unconditionally. Two quickies, new areas. Right now, where do we all agree the most, and where do we all agree the least? I did a true-false test with people last week. When I said to people, true or false, Putin is an extremely dangerous man and a thug and a criminal, 95%, no, I think it was more. It was like 95.8% of my voters said true. So think about that, right? I mean, it's now people disagree with what to do about that, but most Americans think that Putin is just a very bad dude. The place where we're the most divided, or at least among the questions that I had asked, and I asked about 30 of them, I said to people, true or false, to what extent would you be proud to send your child or your grandchild to Harvard? And I will tell you that half of the country said false, which was really shocking to me, that Harvard message, that elitist message has really gotten through. I think that's very sad. Do we have a lot of international people here? Should I jump into, I'm not going to jump into foreign policy, but if you have questions about foreign policy, let me know. And I have a couple of things also just about younger generations and how we can engage in conversations with people who are, if you're a baby boomer, what you do with your grandchildren, what you can talk to a Gen Z person about, et cetera. But let me just stop there for a second and see what kinds of questions you have at this point. I guess we have something in the chat. How did you gain the trust of voters across the political spectrum? So I think there were a couple of things. One, the way I did this was when I was building the panel, I interviewed every voter for 30 minutes. And I did it partially because I wanted to get background information. Who are you? Who'd you vote for in 2008, in 2012, in 2016, 2020, or whatever? So I wanted to get all that background information so that I could code everything as we move forward. But the other thing I did is I wanted to build a relationship with them so that they would know that on the other end of all these questions was a person who wanted to know what they had to think and who wasn't going to judge them. So on purpose, I asked them questions where they could see me saying, that's really interesting. Tell me why you voted that way, or tell me what you thought. So number one, I started by trying to build trust with each person one-on-one. Other things that really mattered, letting people, I would give, even when I was writing Globe articles, I would tell everyone in the community what I was learning before I actually let all that out in public. People would have questions, people would say controversial things. I really tried to make people feel heard. I tried to make sure that I would let them know how I was going to use the data. I had to deal with everyone that I would never be willing to get money from anybody for the results of this, because people were worried they were going to give me all this insight, and then I'd go and like sell it to the enemy or whatever else. And I think over time, just making people feel heard was a big deal. At one point, I was thinking about taking the whole panel down. I thought it was enough already. I feel like I've asked these people everything. And everybody started saying, don't do this, don't do this. You're the only person in my life who listens to me. Like, my boss doesn't listen to me. My wife doesn't listen to me. My kids don't listen to me. But, I get this feeling that when I'm saying something, it's interesting and important and it matters to me. And, it's amazing what people will tell you if you make them feel like you're listening to them. I learned that from consumer research. All right. Ooh, a whole bunch of questions here. Ron, do you want to?
Sure, I'll just pick a few of them and get
Okay,
going.
yeah, you decide what to ask in what order.
Right, I'm going to go sort of in order here. So there was a question about, were there any moments when a young voter and an older voter surprised you by agreeing on something in a meaningful way? Because I think you mentioned, we have these stereotypes of how young people think and older people think, and so let's talk about that. One of the big issues for the Gray Panthers is, not older and younger together. So it's not just about advocating for older folks. It's about an intergenerational or multi-generational approach. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, sure. I mean, I think, first of all, I found a lot of common ground between older voters and younger voters on everything. I mean, I think things were split more by party than they were by age. So obviously younger voters care a tremendous amount about issues that affect their future, like climate change. They tend to worry about that more because, they say, gee, you guys don't need to worry about it because you're not going to be alive when, the oceans overflow into our country, et cetera. But there's lots of common ground there. I think that it's not that we disagree on the issues, but sometimes where we have assumptions about who we are and why that are in conflict. So if you're a baby boomer, and I assume a bunch of us are, here's our narrative. The young people these days, I don't know, like they don't want to work hard. Like we worked really hard. You know, we worked 60 hours a week and we liked it. And we had coworkers there. We had less money. We had fewer resources. We took civics. We took geography. We understood how a bill becomes a law, etc. And yet, you know, it's so interesting. I mean, there are plenty of baby boomers where when they're talking to me about what they really believe, I figured that they didn't take civics or geography because they don't know where Ukraine is and they don't remember how a bill becomes a law. You know, our younger generations, many people, I know my daughters are millennials, they believe that although their parents worked harder, we failed them. You know, the national debt is high. Our environment is an enormous problem. We are divided. They feel like we have too many guns, and none of them expect to get Social Security. They feel like it will run out way, way before they get into their 60s. So it's like, thanks a lot. So it's less about disagreeing on the goal of this, and I think more about disagreeing about who's right and, you know, who's the generation that really matters the most. And, you know, just all of that stuff about, you know, trusting somebody over 30 and everything, you know, is just coming back. You know, I think there is more radicalism among younger people. There are more young people who are extremely left, you know, very woke, as you would say, more people who are extremely right. You know, but there is what they have in common is enormous distrust of government, and not that government is necessarily going to screw them over, but that government has the ability to get anything done. And that's again on both sides of the spectrum. And it's really interesting to talk to people about this and to say, you know, what's your perspective on this? I mean, it's interesting to talk to a young person who says, look, you know, I don't really like Donald Trump, but I don't have a job. I'm not sure what's going to happen in my future. We have all these school shootings. I was growing up, it was September 11th. There's violence in the cities. I mean, something has to change. I voted because I just thought something had to change. And to say to somebody, tell me more about that. What are your friends saying? Give me an example of that. How did you come to that conclusion? Is fascinating. And the more that you say, you know, tell me more about why you feel that way, the more that people will talk. So I think that, you know, there are people, just like there are older people, who just don't care, don't want to deal with anything. Government doesn't matter. But I think that number is declining. About a year ago, if you ask most Americans, does who's president really matter? Like, does it matter who's president? Lots of people would say, well, I think so. I think it matters who's president. There's not a lot of people aren't not wondering about that very much right now. They think it matters very much whether they're happy or not.
Yeah. Diane, there was a question that sort of followed up your question about, you know, going to Harvard. About what about the question, would you be proud to have your child going to college, interested in going to college? 'Cause it seems like this is something that's really been different over my lifetime. Is that, you know, when I was in high school, like, oh, everyone has to go to college. You got to go to college.
Right.
Period. You have no
Right.
choice. You have to go to college.
Right.
And now this really does seem to be a sort of a splitter, you know, issue that there's a lot of differences, and you know, people, you know, obviously some colleges get a ton of applicants still, no matter what the price. But there are a lot of people say college, you know, and of course it's woke, it's this, it's that. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most people, I have not, Francis, I have not asked that question specifically. What I tell you is I think that for most people, the issue is not, is college good, and more, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze? So can I afford 4 years off, you know, at 80, 90, $100,000 a year by the time I pay? I mean, can I do that? Can I even afford to have something like that? So affordability is a big issue. Having said that, I think we forget how many young people and how many people in the United States are not college educated. And, one of the things that really struck me, you always hear when people talk about Trump supporters, they'll say, well, that's uneducated white guys. Oh, the women who like Trump, oh, they're uneducated. Like, we say that as a value, like they're not smart. And therefore, that's why they voted for this guy. And I think saying that does us a real disservice. And one of the stories I remember the most is I had a voter who was a woman, a young woman from Northwest Ohio. She told me when I was interviewing her that she grew up in a town where there were not only no people of color, there were no brunettes. Like, everyone was white and blonde. And she talked about her town and everything. And she said she kind of always felt like she wanted to get out of there, but she was smart and she got a scholarship to Boise State University. So she went to Boise State and her eyes were opened. Boise State has an enormous international population, so she saw every color. And of course, she saw a lot of people who didn't have blonde hair, and she said it was eye-opening. So of course, it's just like a movie. She ends up falling for a guy who is Lebanese and dark-skinned, and she decides that she's bringing him home to her family for Thanksgiving. So she brings the guy home, and her parents are absolutely, well, one is appalled and the other is just so awkward she doesn't know what to do. And her parents finally sit down and say, look, this is disrespectful to your family. We can't have, literally the family rejects her dating a person of color, and she tries to describe what she's seen on the campus of her university. Anyway, they end up going back to Boise State and having Thanksgiving there. And now they are married and they just moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. So the reason I like that story is I think that going to college is not just about getting the content. Going to college is about opening up your aperture, about beginning to see the world differently, like literally starting to see that, yes, our there's a whole wide world out there, and that America's interests and our relationships with other countries are just inextricably interconnected. We all breathe the same air. We contract the same virus. We use the same internet. Our trade is mutually beneficial. Like, that whole experience that she had of seeing other people completely changed her view of foreign policy. So I think that's a lot of it. Sometimes we think about college as college, like where you get the degree and where you get the diploma, but we forget sometimes that it's about the perspective that you get. And I'll give you the opposite example. I remember talking to one of my voters who was a Republican, a very avid Trump supporter in Pennsylvania. And what we were talking about was that in the beginning of after Russia attacked Ukraine, he was really against supporting Ukraine. And he said, we should talk about this on the phone. And, I said to him, okay, so talk to me, like, what's going on here? I really, really want to understand this. And he told me a story about his nephew, who he was from southeastern Pennsylvania. He told me a story about his nephew who got into a college that was in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which was a few hours, I think 3.5 hours west of where he grew up. So to go to the college, the family packed a bag and stayed with this guy, Jim, in Broomall, which is about 1.5 hours west, to break up the trip. Like, this was the biggest trip that they had ever made, going from southeastern Pennsylvania, stopping halfway, and then doing the rest of the 3.5 hour trip the following day. And he said to me, Diane, do you think these people know where Ukraine is? Like, think about it. Think about the lives that people are living. They're not flying all over the place, doing their thing all over the world. Their worlds are, and especially if you haven't had a college type experience, their experiences are often much more narrow, and that shapes their opinions in huge ways.
Great. Okay. There are lots of questions. They're all good questions. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can, and I'm jumping around a bit. So this is a question that I think is difficult for people. This is more political and provocative, but I've heard this a lot. How do you reconcile those who believe, like me, that the current POTUS has created an authoritarian government that does not serve the interests of the people, and is dismantling this democracy? How do you basically? Uh, I'm sorry. Uh, I have a hard time wanting to engage with someone who believes this is the right path for the country. So
Yeah.
these are the really tough ones where it's like I don't, and I have some friends like I can't engage with someone who believes that. So what do you think about that?
Mhm. Well, the way I reconcile it is most of what I learned is when I can't figure out why somebody would like something about a candidate, I just flip it over. I remember once asking my voters, I said, for those of you who support Trump, I'm just wondering, like the Washington Post, I can't remember the numbers, one of you might have it. The Washington Post has added it up and Trump's lied 120 times, like in the past month,
Right.
or whatever else. Like, how do you do that? And here's the response. They all lie. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean they all lie? I did not have sex with that woman. You can keep your doctor. I mean, they literally can list, all of that. So I don't reconcile it. I don't say, just assume that it's not an authoritarian government, but people feel that the last people who feel that way, who are supporting Trump, believe that the last administration was just as guilty, just not in the open. So, for instance, if you don't like Trump, you believe that he's got this shadow group, like he's got his cabinet people, but then he's got a whole bunch of Stephen Miller, Elon Musk type people who are there running the country and making decisions, and we didn't even elect them, which is one element of an authoritarian government, that unelected people who are friends of and who support the ruler are in there making the decisions and cutting budgets and implementing policies and, doing whatever. What a Trump supporter would say is, I know that you're worried about that, but that's not a new issue. So when Biden was incapable of making decisions, when he was at a point where he was not cognitively able to run the government, who do you think was making a lot of decisions? It was his staff. It was people, I'm just quoting people, it was the Ron Klain type people who were there propping him up, allocating resources and everything. And they'd go on Sunday morning in TV and say, well, the president has made this decision, but in reality, there was a shadow government also then that was kind of making decisions. So, they're looking at that and saying, and that was quiet. At least here, if there are people who are advisors to Trump who were not elected, at least we know who they are. And they're talking about what they're doing and how they're making the decisions, unlike all of the secret things that were going on before that we are now just starting to learn about. I mean, that's one example, but I think that's what people are saying, on the other side, like, wake up, I don't like this, but I didn't like what I saw for the last 4 years. Government effectiveness and Doge and all of that stuff. I mean, the data, if you look up that infrastructure bill and all of the money that we allocated to new bridges and new roads and new trains and new buses, and looking at it, and that something like only 5% of that money was ever actually used to start building things, at least yet so far. The inability of the government to actually get stuff done. So we're saying, gee, you're cutting this back, but it's just they feel like no matter what, in both administrations, government has been ineffective, and they're just trying to make it happen. Believe me, this doesn't mean you have to feel great about what's going on. What I'm trying to do here is to demonstrate to you what's behind people's thinking when they're saying, I know, like, I don't like Putin. I think he's a thug. I don't like the fact that he's pulling money out of PBS. I don't like the fact that he's whatever, but, Biden was worse. I voted against Biden. I mean, that's how to reconcile it in terms of what's going on with other people. And I really used to learn that in the beginning when I was doing this research. I'd see somebody and they'd say, oh, I hear you're doing all this research. I voted for Trump. And I'd kind of size them up and I'd say, I know, because you didn't like Hillary. And they would go, how did you know? I think the guy's kind of a jerk. I never thought he was going to win. I remember what I was wearing when I realized he was going to win. I never thought he would, but I just hated her. I mean, it's constantly I know things are bad, but look what it was like before. And that's the way people are thinking about it. And I think the other thing that's going on, I think the other thing that's going on just in terms of reconciling, let me see who that is. That's Meg, is I think that Trump supporters they resent that the Democratic Party gets hyped up about issues that are not really critical to them, issues that you might think are, I guess the way I talk about it is a distraction. So something like 70% of Americans have a really tough time making ends meet. They are saving less than $50 per month. So fewer than 50% of them, it's about, just assume that it's, I can't remember what all the numbers are. I could look it up. Last year, I think it was 68% of Americans are having trouble making ends meet. This literally means that you are trying to make decisions about whether to feed your family or go to the doctor. And people are delaying healthcare appointments because they want to buy stuff for their family. So what happens is you've got so many critical issues in our country: climate change, immigration issues, bridges crumbling, people without internet access, unaffordable healthcare, people shooting each other, China beating us, Russia trying to hack our, you name it. But if Marjorie Taylor Greene decides to say that little pink people are invading the White House, everybody stops. It's like the Kardashians. It's a distraction, and we have to stay focused. So the big problem with what the other side of yours, Meg, would say about woke policies is really like, I can't afford to feed my family, and you're going to the mat on transgender athletes or whatever, or transgender bathrooms, which it was at the time that this person gave me the quote. So focusing on the stuff that really matters is that they want government to do, and they feel that Democrats, sometimes they're talking about their own party, just literally lost their way, got distracted on issues that were not important to just everyday Americans.
Yeah. So we have a number of questions, Diane, that are sort of similar. I wanted to kind of combine them. So one starts off saying, various people have proposed or started a variant of Project 2026, the theme for the 250th anniversary of 1776. Basically, something that unifies the country. And then any suggestions of groups that are promising for this sort of theme. And then there was another question asking specifically about other groups, like one group I'm familiar with, Braver Angels, and then that sort of combined with, if you had done this over again, would you do something differently?
Okay. So I'm really conflicted on this. There are a couple of issues that I think are where Americans really, really agree with each other, and less about, gee, I hate Putin, and more on a policy level. So an example is, most Americans believe we need to get money out of politics. There is, I can't remember the name of the organization, but it'll come back to me. There is an organization that I've done a bunch of events for, and they are completely dedicated to having a constitutional amendment to get rid of Citizens United and not allow money in politics anymore. Everybody agrees with that. Another issue is getting rid of student debt is very, very unpopular in the United States. The reason it's unpopular is lots of people don't even go to college, so they're worried that their tax dollars are going to pay off the debts of people who got to go to college. They feel like that's super unfair. And they also feel that there could be programs to help people pay off their student debt, but to literally just say, we're just kidding, you made a commitment, you don't have to pay, is just the wrong way to go. One thing that people are positive about is if you have that kind of debt or any other kind of debt, our young people could participate in some kind of government program where they take a year of their lives and go, work in a nonprofit or work on some kind of a program or whatever. In other words, work on behalf of the government to actually pay something back that helps pay off your debt, but that actually really benefits society, which of course would be a great, as they say, experience for younger people. So there are lots of programs like that that could be super creative if somebody thought them through, and which might get people really excited. Personally, when I look at what I see my voters talking about and worrying about, I think that if you're a Democrat, the main thing that will make a difference is a new set of leaders who are smart and exciting and charismatic, who can then have some good content. But I think the good content in the absence of the leader is probably not going to help. I mean, if you read about Reagan and the mess that the Democratic Party was in when Reagan became president, now everybody talks about Reagan. He was so wonderful. He was so wonderful. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like I hated Reagan at the time, but the Democratic Party was in a mess. And there are lots of interesting stories about the people who came back and who revitalized the Democratic Party. And so that's what I think we need that's what you need as Democrats, much more so than I wouldn't start with the message. I'd start with identifying who the messengers are. I did a project once with my voters when Pete Buttigieg was announcing his candidacy for president. No one had heard of him. And the first interview he did was with Jake Tapper on CNN, and I had a video of that. So I sent the video to my voters and I said, look, this is a really time-consuming project. You don't all need to do it. But if you want to be geeky, I'd love to hear your perspective. Here's a guy who's just announced that he's running for president. You probably can't even pronounce his name. Take a look at him and make a journal as you listen to this interview and tell me what you think of him. Because what I'm interested in is what shapes your opinion and especially your first impression of a candidate. So there's Buttigieg and everything. I'm watching the thing. Well, 120 out of the 500 did this exercise. And the first comment they made was people who were more on the Republican side said things like, oh my gosh, I don't like this guy. I can't believe he's not even wearing a jacket. He's got like a white shirt and his sleeves are rolled up. And the more liberal people were saying, wow, what a breath of fresh air. I love that he took off his jacket and he's like rolling up his sleeves. But so many of the comments were what kind of person this is, how he's sitting, whether it's funny, whether it looks like you can trust him, whether it's okay to put your jacket on or not put your jacket on or whatever else. And so I think that we talk a lot about issues, but I find that people vote a lot based on other things. How does the person come across? Can I trust them? Are they strong? I mean, if you think about it, there's a piece of me that says that the primary reason that Trump won and Biden lost is that Trump was strong and Biden was weak, period. Forget all the other policies. But that's kind of how they were perceived by people, and everyone was looking for strength at a time when there are so many challenges in the country. So that's a long way of saying, I think we need a new generation of messengers. And if you look at history, it will probably be people whose names we don't know right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There was a question about, which I'd like to broaden a little bit, about how did you learn about how different generations consume news and form opinions? And again, I'd rather not be, I know there's an impulse to stereotype generations, and I think there are stereotypes have some validity. There's a kernel of truth, but talk about how people generally from different demographics process news differently, not just generationally.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could see all of your faces and everything. I tell you, raise your hand if you get a physical newspaper. Like I get a physical newspaper still. I'm 70 though.
Right.
How many people have cable TV? Like, are you still what they call tethered?
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you get CNN or Fox or MSNBC on your TV? Most people under the age of 50 are untethered. They literally, you cannot go to their homes and turn on cable news. They get it through their laptops, they get it through streaming and everything else. And they're not subscribing to the New York Times and then reading the New York Times. They're getting things mostly through social media. So that if they
Mm-hmm.
see a New York Times article that they think is really interesting, it's because a friend of theirs posted it on Instagram, or. So most people, and especially young people, are getting their primary news sources from their friends via social media. That doesn't mean they're uneducated about the issues. It's just that they're mostly educated by a cohort of people that they already know, as opposed to some, third party. Now, I think before we disparage that, it's worth understanding. I mean, you have to understand TikTok. You have to understand the seduction. And you don't have to join TikTok to do that. I mean, just go on Facebook and find reels and hit reels and start scrolling on Facebook through all of the reels. And maybe you see, George Clooney and his beautiful wife Amal at some kind of award ceremony. And you go, oh, that's interesting. I think I'll watch that. And then you move to the next thing and you see Billy Joel, in his last concert last February before he came public with his diagnosis. And you kind of read that. And after a while, if you start scrolling through those reels, all of a sudden, everything that's in your reels is something that you're super interested in. It could be jokes about something that you've spent a lot of time on or whatever. And when you do that, you start seeing the seduction of what it's like to have a social media network that that has an algorithm that feeds you stuff that you love to watch. And that's what's going on. So everything is working now to actually serve up for you things that will really engage you, and it's going to get worse. So understanding it and, saying to people who are younger, talk to me a little bit about how you get your news.
Mm-hmm.
How did you hear about X? Right? Did you hear that? I mean, I live in New England, so I could say this. Did you hear that Trump said that he was going to not let any international students go to Harvard? Oh, yeah, I heard that. Well, where did you hear that? Well, I saw it on Instagram. Well, can you show me where on Instagram you saw it? I want to see that. Like, I read that in the Boston Globe. I looked at the policy, I read the Harvard response, I did all of that stuff. They're
Mm-hmm.
getting the news, but they're getting it differently in a curated fashion with lots of conversation going on there. And you have to look at it. If you're not using Chat GPT, I mean, I could do a whole other session, but you have to do it. Like go chat.openai.com. Spend $20 a month to get the version that's really great and just go at it. It is not hard. It changes your life because our kids are doing it, and we have to stay relevant. So just all of that, the media consumption is changing, but just because they don't read the newspaper doesn't mean they're uninformed. It's just a completely different world.
Right. Michelle, I know we're getting close to the end here. I'm sure there are other questions. Uh, I know we want to reserve a little time for other announcements. I did want to ask a question, Diana, myself, which is one of the things that I loved about the book is that not only, really being transparent about your methodology, how you did this. So yes, I'm a former newspaper reporter, so I appreciate that. But also that I had a number of supervisory positions, and part of the training for supervisors, well, how do you be a better active listener? But basically very little about what does that mean and how do you do it. And I think one of the real values of your book is that you really lay it out like this is what it really means to be an expert listener. Because I think people don't know that. They don't really understand what that really entails. So, any thoughts more? I mean, other than buying a book and making everybody in Congress read it, um, um, and any
Yeah.
thoughts on how do we get this overall message about how to listen to each other? There's a way to do it. It's not just try hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, look, I think the first thing is just desire. I mean, I was lucky because my passion is research. And let me just come clean here. I always try to be nonpartisan here, but I'm seeing some of the comments in the chat. I have never voted Republican in my entire life. So so for me, I think Donald Trump is a despicable guy. Having said that, I've got 250 Trump voters who have devoted hours and hours and hours, and I haven't paid them one dime
Mm-hmm.
to open up their hearts to me and tell me what's going on in their lives. And most of these people are my friends now. I mean, I had one about 2 years into my project. She writes me a note and says, Diane, I need to talk to you. This is a woman from Florida. She's Republican. And she voted for Hillary Clinton. And I knew a lot about her. And she said, I need to talk. And I get on the phone with her and she says, look, I feel really guilty. I'm at a point where I can't sleep, but I think that I'm messing up your research. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I have to tell you something. I voted for Donald Trump. And you've been classifying me as a Clinton supporter, and I voted for him. But here's the thing. My husband doesn't know. Like, if my husband finds out about this, I think he's going to leave me.
Mm.
And I was thrilled. I mean, it wasn't like, ooh, I don't like you because I don't like Donald Trump. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm so thrilled that this person trusts me enough to be able to tell me the truth. And that's what I get a lot from people. When I was trying to understand voter fraud, Michelle mentioned this, but I write about it early in the book. I mean, I just thought that everybody who thought the election was fraudulent was like crazy. I thought they were uninformed and all of that. And it was fascinating. Like, I started asking these people what was going on for them. And here they did a tremendous amount of research. They had more websites and more videos of people talking about fraud. And they would say things to me like, when we thought that when the Democrats thought that the Russians were involved in the election, we hired Robert Mueller, a really fancy lawyer. We spent $12 million on an investigation, da, da, da. We think the election's fraudulent. Nobody investigates anything. Nobody respects us. I mean, it was just so fascinating to me. So the reason I'm saying all this is I have the privilege of just wanting to know what people think and not trying to convince them to change their minds. And if you can do that, you learn a tremendous amount. You don't always hear what you want to hear, but you do hear about the ardent pro-life Trump supporter whose daughter has an abortion. You do hear about a lifetime member of the NRA who decides we need much more gun regulation. I mean, you get all of those stories because you're not sitting there going, I can't deal with talking to anybody anymore. Like, I tried my family, I messed up Thanksgiving, but instead of saying, well, why don't you talk and then I'll tell you why you're wrong, just try hearing somebody out and saying, help me understand that. Like, tell me more. Where does that come from? Did you always vote that way? Do you like the guy? What do you think about Putin? What else? What do you think about people who, think this and that? It's fascinating. It is hard. And it's especially hard now because, I mean, I can barely watch TV anymore. I can barely watch TV anymore because for me, I think Trump is so despicable and I think he's causing so much damage. But we have to keep that emotion, if you're a Democrat, keep that emotion disconnected from people who support him because they have stories about how they grew up and what happened to them or what happened to their child or whatever that weave together a different kind of story than what you'd expect. And that's what's fascinating for me. So that's kind of how I deal with all of that. But it's not easy, but listen without trying to change someone's mind. Just
Right.
do it because they're your next door neighbor and you can't stand ignoring them anymore.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this over to Michelle, but I just want to leave with echo one thing you said that I will take away and remember. It's those 3 words, and you know what they are. Tell me more.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Diane. This has been fascinating and enlightening. Michelle?
Yeah.
Diane, I think we need a few more hours with you. So we might be in
By
touch.
the way, I thought of that organization. American Promise is the organization that's trying to get an amendment to the Constitution to get rid of Citizens United, and they've already got 22 states. They are amazing. So check out their website just for a common issue. Sorry, Michelle.
Well, thank you so much. And as I say, I think we'll have to invite you back. So this is a conversation that we still haven't resolved, and
Yes. Yeah.
it's a long one. But I also want everyone to know that we are co-sponsoring a town hall on here it is, Medicaid Town Hall. And we'll send the link, but you can RSVP by going to caring.nu/Medicaid-town hall. So we will have people answering questions on issues that we're all concerned about. And also next month, June 24th, we'll have another author, Margaret Goulet, who will speak about her book, American Elderside. So hope to see everyone both on June 4th and June 24th. Thanks again, Diane. And we recommend reading Our Common Ground. So let's see what we can do to change the course of what's going on today. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks,
See
everybody.
you again.